which is Amrin Razak. Today, we are streaming across YouTube only, and the text number for the studio is 07748 8555055. So please text in any questions or comments, and then via the YouTube also. So as your host today in the studio with me, I have Rob Watson, who is from Decentered Media, and we're going to go into a little bit about what it is to be talking about community voices in a smart city. So Jazakallah khair for joining us today. I pray you are all well, and let's get on with it, inshallah. So, Rob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us in the studio today. It's certainly different from being behind the scenes. So tell us a little bit about yourself in Decentered Media and what you do, Rob.
Well, where do I start? I do stuff around community media. So it's about helping people to learn how to do this, community radio, how to tell stories, how to organise debates and discussions, all using media platforms that are we run ourselves. So it's like a very DIY approach to media.
Okay.
And it's about saying that anybody can get involved with making and being part of media, and we do it for ourselves and our families and friends and our communities, rather than it being some kind of big, corporate, international kind of commercial Netflix or anything like that. It's us sitting having a conversation.
Yeah.
So it's about what are the kind of stories we would want to talk about? What are the experiences that we have? One of the things I always say is it's not really about our opinions. There's plenty of spaces where we can all go and express our opinions on social media. It's about our experiences and what does it mean to live in a place like Leicester today, the different people around us. This neighbourhood is very different from my neighbourhood. I'm on the other side of town over by Narborough Road, and each has a different flavour, but you wouldn't think that. You wouldn't know that if you pick up, the Leicester Mercury, or if you listen to the BBC. Doesn't really tell those local, neighbourhood type stories.
Yeah. And I think that's what I love about, when I was looking through all the work that you do and what you've done over the years, that's what I love about it. It's about creating spaces for the community to be that voice, and actually empowering people to know that they can have a voice, and be able to express it in a way that is telling their side of the story. And I absolutely love that, because there's been so many projects that you've been involved with over the years. So then that brings me on to kind of, we're here to talk about a smart city and what it is about a smart city. So firstly, for those who don't know, what is a smart city, firstly?
Well, I suppose a smart city is a city that makes intelligent choices about how it does things. But that can involve technology and information, data, networks, all those kind of things. But it can also involve a point where we'd say, no, we're going to not use technology for something, so it can go in the opposite direction. But a smart city is something that tries to incorporate a good understanding of what's sustainable, a good understanding of what's inclusive, but a good understanding of how we can get the best out of the technologies that we've got and the technologies that are coming in to make that our lives better, and to facilitate a higher standard of living, a better quality of life, without being, if you like, controlled by robots or slaves to the system.
Yeah. So then that kind of brings me on to, because even just for me, in preparation to interview you, I was reading a little bit about what smart city is, and to be honest, I've never really thought about it to the length that maybe I should do, for sure. But then that also makes me think, for your everyday person, is when they're going to make an appointment or go to the supermarket and stuff, how is that relevant to them in terms of the features of what a smart city is? What would you say to those everyday?
Well, I think I had an experience a few years ago when I was sitting in an Asda. I was just visiting my local supermarket, a Tesco, where I was in an Asda, and we were in the cafe. And all of the posters and all of the marketing material around the supermarket was saying, this is your local grocers. And it was like pictures. And I realised none of that was relevant. That's, if you like, that's the marketing hype and myth that they create. What it is, it's a data management center. It's about information. Each item and each person that goes through that store is a piece of data in a database that gets moved around and shuffled about. So when you walk up to the shelf, there's a product there that you tend to want, and it's restocked at the prices that they can supply it from. So it comes in from, say, I don't know, it's brought in on a lorry from Spain overnight, and it appears on the shelf in front of you. How do they know how to get that equipment there efficiently, cheaply, so that they can make a profit and that we can get goods and services in front of us? It's like a well-oiled kind of, well, it's not a machine anymore, is it? It's a data system.
Well, it's data, isn't it? It's
information
management. It's information which is based on the user. And I think from the findings and the conversations I've had with people, they are usually kind of like in fear because they don't know what's happening to that data, which we will talk about. But they also maybe haven't thought about that when they do go to the supermarket or when they do catch the bus, like, you know, transport-wise, or even if you're using an app to get a cab, it all takes data, right? And it is to do with geographically where we are. Like, you know, you said the difference you noticed from being at Narborough Road coming down to Evington, things like that. So then that brings me on to the next part is, what does being, I'd say, having digital literacy mean for a city that is so vast, like the community of Leicester? Why is it so important, and what should we be doing? So I guess it's a two-pronged question: is why is it so important for Leicester, and secondly, why should we be more involved and need to understand a bit more about it?
Digital literacies are essential to understand how we use data and technology and how that is using us. But then that's separate from culture. And I think culture is, if you like, a different domain, but they have to interact. So that's kind of where there's the crossover, if you like, and one informs the other and the other informs the other, and you have to ask lots of questions about that. And to think that data and being a smart city is free from cultural questions or free from cultural ideas, really kind of it isn't the right question to ask. There are many questions that we can ask about how we use this and why we use this, which is separate from the development of the systems themselves. So one of my concerns is you know, if you use a map, a sat nav system, and you go to, you know, you use it to get about the city and you drive or you get the bus or whatever, you can't go knock on the door of those people who own and run that app and say, I don't like the way you directed me to get to you know, Beaumont Leys, or I don't like the way that you directed me to get to Scraptoft from the city centre. But people are using these things all the time, and they're allowing them to redirect them around the city in different ways, because you know, the real-time information that they've got now tells you where the traffic flows, traffic jams are, and so people are putting a lot of trust in them. So what is it that people are trusting? Because I mean, one of I was in a post office once, and a woman was at the queue and she was getting served. When it came to pay, a card didn't work, or it didn't go through the first time. So she breathed on it and rubbed it on it as if there was some kind of living thing inside the card. It didn't make any. It doesn't work that way.
But people do that. I mean, I've known to do that when you've got your cards next to your phone. It's the magnet. It's a normal thing that people tend to do.
We feel like there's a spirit inside it,
or something that we control in that way.
Yeah, and it isn't. You know, it's electrons and magnetism and you know, things like that. And it's like what we understand. We bring with us our cultural stories that help us frame how we use these things. And that's why a lot of the time, so there's two levels. A lot of this stuff is going in so it's invisible. So it's just being put in so that you don't notice. You've got no idea it's happening. But then at the same time, there's when it goes wrong or when it protrudes into our lives, and you have to divert around it, or you have to say no to it, that's when it becomes interesting, because it's kind of, But the two things are going up. It's like an iceberg, isn't it? We see 10% of it above the waterline, and 90% of it is
what's
below
really
the
going
water.
on.
Yeah.
That's really funny how you say that situation, because just over the last week or so, I've been having conversation obviously about a smart city and in terms of what it is doing for our health and well-being, and looking at the age groups to ask this particular question in leading up to this show. I've had some really different responses. So, those people who are not quite sure in terms of what happens to the data, how do we explain to them in terms of the importance to why Leicester needs to be more on it? Because I was looking at internationally in terms of what's happening in the rest of Europe, and although people might think Leicester's quite ahead, it's actually quite not in certain aspects. So what would you say to those people? For example, somebody who is trying to make an appointment to their GP or their doctor, or have some kind of consultation appointment, and they've got to wait months because to be in person. What would you say to those kind of people?
Well, one of the important things is being able to use the data to analyse what's happening, how people are using things, and then change things so that it better matches what people's needs are and what people's, if you like, habits or routines are. So what you get is a better understanding, and then you can predict when and where things are going to change. So we get a change of the seasons. That impacts on the amount of flu or COVID. It was the same with COVID, kind of less COVID during the summer because more people are out and about, you've got your windows open. Whereas in the winter, you can predict that there would be more infections. Flu is always on the rise.
In winter.
But where are the hotspots? What's the age groups? So where do you need... So you can use that data and you can analyse it. Whereas in the past... And you can do it quicker. So if you need to send in say you're the local health authority and you need to send in a team to do vaccinations, flu jabs in a particular area because there's suddenly a bubble of people reporting that they've got the flu, then you've got the ability to draw that data in live from the whatever captures that information, and then feed that back into the system. So you've got a kind of more responsive approach.
And I think going back now with what you're saying is, I think looking at, especially over the last, I'd say 3 years, even prior to COVID, is that when there's certain areas, and we know with community work, is when there's a certain up on a particular illness, we know that then the resource, the energy is put in there. So I think for me to explain it to those who don't understand why data is important is so these things can be more quicker and a bit more robust. Like you look at our counterparts across Europe and they're doing things so much more quicker because they've got the data to hand. So how do we go about educating people, and what else can we do as a city that we're not doing?
Well, that's a big
and I know
talking to people and doing things like community radio programs that share the discussion, because too often we have a kind of reliance on people who are expert about things. Now, I'm not an expert on AI or on smart cities or information technology, those kind of things. That's not what my expertise is. But I kind of know that when you have conversations on it that are reasonably well informed, that are accountable, then you're in the right area to move and help, bringing people along with you. So what you don't do is you don't say we know best. You don't say you should listen and accept everything that we're going to say. But you have a voice as well, and your listeners will. So you're acting on behalf of your listeners, and your listeners can message into the station, into the program, and message you, and they can be part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a million questions that I've never thought of. That somebody might just phone in. One of those questions might be wow, we'd never thought of that. Let's explore that.
And then have a look at it. And I think I want to explain to our listeners is also that the work that Rob is doing is actually part of a long-term research program. So, if you do have any questions, if you'd like to get involved in the conversations that he's going to be having over the next couple of weeks, then please contact him. Just give your Instagram, please, so people can get in touch.
Probably best through Leicester Stories, actually. So leicesterstories.uk is the website, and the Twitter and Instagram is LEIC, L-E-I-C, Stories. I think we're on Facebook as well, but I never check that.
Yeah. Or you could just go onto his actual business page, which is decentered.co.uk, and on there you can contact him that way as well. I think it's really important for to have these conversations, because I think when there's particular thing, especially what we've seen in our hubs around Leicester City over the 2 years in particular, 3 years almost, is people don't realise the importance of how important their data is. But I think I now want to turn that around, is that what can we, the misinformation or maybe the mistrust, I'd say, is people have around what happens to their data. And I think that's from the conversations I've had already, just in terms of this part of the research for today, is people are afraid of what's going to happen to their information, or where it's going to be recorded, if there's going to be anonymity, if their name's going to be used, where's it going to be? So, these are the questions we get. And I think I'd say digital apathy, and to be involved, I think it's a real big part in terms of the education for everyone, not particularly in any particular age group, but I have seen people of a certain age group have certain tendencies also. And I think it's trying to explain it and understand it in a way that they understand the importance of what the information that they have, and how it's going to help, long term, and putting contingencies in place long term. So what would you say to those?
Well, it's a
I know it's a loaded question.
It's a massive area, isn't it? And we need to think about how we invest in this over the long term, in terms of raising people's awareness. And we really don't do enough a lot of the time. A lot of the time we're just kind of skimming through things. So you do things on the basis of trust. But when you find out that, kind of the interesting one is the way Apple has changed some of the settings on their iPhones now, so that you can reduce the amount of information that advertisers can take from you.
Yeah.
So Facebook's value has dropped because they're no longer able to get this information to sell it onto advertisers. And you're thinking, well, whose information is that? Well, it's our information. So do we have the right, as a human right, to control that information? And maybe to some extent we don't. We have some rights, but we don't have, in the UK, we don't have comprehensive rights over there. It's different now in the EU. Looks at this slightly differently, and we're maybe moving away from that rights-based approach of protection of your personhood, your selfhood online as information. But it's got lots of layers to it, and sometimes you can be fearful of sharing information when in fact it's actually a really useful thing. So within the health service, for example, being able to share your information about long-standing health conditions can help people to understand better. But if we all recoil and don't share that information, so it's how do you create a non-exploitative, trusted environment? And you've got to do that by involving people and addressing their concerns. So it's got to be a dialogue. You've got to have lots of conversations with people to, help people to understand. What you can't do is just, and I think this was one of the bad things through the pandemic, really was just drop an advertising campaign and say, do this, do this, do this. And then... and without taking people along with it.
On a journey.
Yeah, and without giving people the chance to be involved and ask in the conversation, to ask questions, to allay their fears, to understand and learn to separate the misinformation from the genuine information.
I mean, I think that happened later on, but I think at the start of it, there's a lot of this whole apathy that I'm talking about, because of how delivery is done. And this is why I think it brings me back down to, I'm a pure believer of community voices, absolutely, because I think we can actually understand and be empathetic to people's nuances and the worldview that people have, and obviously faith views as well. And there's so much that goes into it, I think, that people don't actually think about. And I think going through this process and just doing the little bit of research that I've done, it's really got me to understand to look at who I'm asking and what I'm asking for, especially when it comes to around when there's going to be changes in, for example, a place like Leicester, policy changes around around planning permission and around building work and all these kind of things. It all makes a difference to the state of our city in terms of what is happening. So yeah, 100%. So again, I want to just reiterate to our listeners and anyone who's listening now and who listens back as well, is that when there's something that is happening, don't be so apathetic to it. Speak to people in the community, and get your voices heard, and approach platforms who are the voice of the community. There's so much happening in the community, but it's not quite centralized, I don't think, in terms of hearing the voices of the community. So contact your local radio stations, definitely get involved, be the voice. When there's some kind of campaign, anything's happening, there's always something happening. It's the world that we live in. If it's around politics, if it's around local leadership, whatever, get involved, in that way.
Well, it's a two-way process. The smart city thing is a two-way process. But it feels it a bit in Leicester that it's only been built to be one way. We call it, kind of bi-directional or omnidirectional, and it's one way at the moment, monodirectional, and it's as if the information only travels one way. But actually, no, that information can travel both ways.
Yeah.
So we can learn more about what our service providers are doing and planning and dealing with, and that gets communicated back to us, so that we can then re-engage with that information. And it's about, there's a number of factors, I think, which was you've got to look at how open information is that gets published in the public domain from our local authorities, health services, education services, that this is actually clearly shared with the public in a way that people can interrogate and people can look at and use smart tools to assess the data and look at the trends and look at the way things are changing, but also as well in terms of that kind of participative democracy where the voices are brought together to discuss the information and to help set and identify what the main issues are. Rather than just leaving it, because there's a kind of tendency, isn't there? It happens wherever you are for the same kind of voices to always be heard. Those people who learn how to get in and use the system, and at one point they might have been the unrepresented voices, but now they're the overrepresented voices because they're always being heard. And it's very easy with kind of community work to just reach for the same people. I find that, doing all the community work, it's always the same people. And I think being involved and understanding this about the smart city and what it is for Leicester, it's a different kind of people, I guess. So, and I'm finding that, and I think it's wholesome and it's healthy. And Leicester's, the first thing is we need the data, the census data. We're desperate for the census data in Leicester, because just to understand who we are as a city, because we're so diverse, and the number of languages that are spoken and the skills that you have. So if you think about something like, I don't know, this Google Translate, for example, that's pretty essential for helping people in a town where there's 180 different languages spoken. And how do you cope with that in a modern city so that everybody understands what's being requested of them? You can walk, you can try and park in a car park, but if you don't understand English, if your literacy skills are English literacy skills are low because it's not your first language, you see a sign and it can just be expressed. Some people might think, well, that's fine. But when it gets translated, it's nonsense. And English is a very difficult language. My only language that I speak is English, and I speak it badly, and it confounds me constantly.
That could, because you're part Liverpudlian.
Well, not just part.
Exactly, more than that. So that could be the reason. No, but jokes aside, I think it's really important. I think. I think we were talking about this before as well, is that when you go traveling, I love traveling, anyone knows that, but there's times where I don't know the language of the country that I'm in, and I will have to use Google Translate, or another app that can translate. And I think it's just amazing if we didn't have the data and the person who's created the app to be able to do that.
Well, one of the things we did for the census in 2021 was we used community radio to engage with people, to tell them. This was after the census day, to tell them why and in what way this information's important, and we used it in different languages. I mean, unbelievably, during the pandemic, before the health teams got out into the city to talk to people, they didn't realise that so many people didn't speak English so well.
Wow.
And it's like, well, don't you walk through the city centre? I would spend most days taking a stroll.
Yeah.
And you'd walk through the town centre, and there would be very few, and this is just a statement of fact, there would be very few people speaking English as their first. Lots of Polish, Turkish, Persian, Lithuanian, just from everywhere, Indian, just accents from everywhere.
Yeah.
And how do you bring that together? And so, if it's so diverse, can we use technology to help with that?
Yeah.
So if we rely on what we've always done in the past as the way of doing things, here's a leaflet, and we do 4 leaflets because Urdu, Punjabi, Gujarati, and maybe
one other
Arabic,
maybe, or maybe one other European language, if
something
you
like that. Yeah. And that, but and we need to but you can't, as a local authority in the health service, how do you you go to the hospital and you're sitting in the queue waiting. I was in the A&E a few months ago waiting for an appointment, and there were about 3 or 4 calls out for staff. They'd put a message out. Does anybody speak Spanish, or does anybody speak, to bring people in? And there's people who work in the health service who all speak these different languages. Yeah. So they've got the information there. Well, what if you're doing that virtually? So one of the things that's happening now is you don't get a GP's appointment. Does that need to be done in the same language as the 2 people? So if you're doing it virtually and it can go through a translator, an AI, artificial intelligence translator, and it gets most of it right, not all of it, do you use it? So if you can have an initial consultation with your doctor to say, actually, I'm doing this, but if your language skills aren't great, do you have to bring somebody in with you? And that's where technology can help, I think. But then it changes the nature of the relationship with the doctor, because the doctor doesn't have the direct contact with the patient.
But isn't that where we're getting to anyway? Like, if we, being a devil's advocate here, I'll give you an example today. We've been trying to get in for my father, who's in his 70s, for the last 2 weeks. Can't get in. My brother actually went to the surgery today, and they go, oh, no, sorry, you need to call at this time, and it can't be today because it's Monday.
That's just not smart.
And
that's
I'm
just
like,
not smart.
Okay, so you'd rather I take my father to A&E, who's already vulnerable, and I'm going to put him into that? And I don't think so. Yeah. It's just, I just think there's some things that are so broke.
And this is where you kind of, the advice I was given is that you ring, is it 111? Or you ring them.
And they've said, call your doctor, because your doctor needs to do something. And you
say to, it's more urgent than that. And they'll say, okay, well, there's a health centre that you can go in and there's open appointment. But you need to know how to navigate that system.
Yeah. And somebody who doesn't speak English or doesn't have a smartphone, like, for example, I was looking at some of the European countries, they've got over 90% who have smartphones. Yeah. Right, and I mean the population's over. Say there's a high percentage of people are living longer, right? Outside of COVID. So then somebody who doesn't speak English, how are they managing a smartphone? Because I want to know. And then how are they getting access to going to appointments? And for example, because we're talking about health and well-being.
Well, there's a lot of hype about digital engagement, and I think we've got to be very careful. People say, it makes government so much more efficient. You put it all online, you make an app for it, but we all know people who are just confounded and maybe don't want to use this technology. There's times I've used it and I've almost wanted to throw my phone out the window.
We've had conversations about
it because and I'm technically literate generally. But at the same time, some of the way things are set up, it doesn't defies common sense. And so you've got this kind of constant bounce back. And I think the worst thing is that because you can't go and talk to the people who manage and put these systems in place, the IT engineers, if you're an IT engineer out there and you're working for a public organisation, please organise once a month a drop-in session or a public engagement session where people can come and talk to you and say, how does this work? What do you do? Because nobody knows who does it. I mean, I've got friends who do IT systems, and they're always behind, 4 screens on a desk, and they're never in the public eye. They never go and talk to people. They get the feedback from the help desk about what's gone wrong, but they never kind of go for a cup of tea with the people who need to use their service to understand. And then we put a lot of money in and investment in very expensive consultants to do human interface type stuff. And it's like, well, we need to humanise the people who are working, who are managing the system, not
the other way around.
We try and fit it. It's like trying to fit a jigsaw piece puzzle into something, a completely different jigsaw. What are we doing with this piece of the jigsaw? It doesn't fit, and it's never going to fit.
I just think that's where I would say we're just not speaking the same language. So these who are creating the systems, there's no, let's meet halfway. There's none of that. And I think then that just highlights to me even more so is like the generation who don't have a smartphone. I'll give you a prime example. I'm talking personally, my own experience of what I'm doing. I've got elders in the family, 70 plus or maybe coming into the 70s. They want to use a smartphone. I keep telling them, you don't need to. No, I want to use a smartphone because I want to be able to do stuff, and I don't want to have to ask my children, grandchildren, etc. And I was like, okay, that's cool. But then you spend a lot of time trying to explain to them, and I'm just like, I feel so bad because they so want to learn. They have the intention and the tenacity to really want to learn, but these phones are just not designed for that generation. So I think the question is how do we support the elder generation in the fast-paced life that we are? Because especially with whether you're a carer or you co-carer, everything like that,
well, again, this is where the kind of technology kicks in, because you can use voice activation now. And smart speakers are great, and you can talk to the TV to get it to change channels. So that's something which is really, that the artificial intelligence that drives voice recognition. It wasn't around 5 years ago. Yeah,
absolutely. But what I'm saying is, it's getting to that point, isn't it? It's the setting up the whole thing and making sure
and it is complicated because you can have things like setting up an email address which people feel like they take for granted, but I suppose what we need is we just need kind of lots and lots of hubs where people can drop in, lots of adult education courses and lots of programs on the radio.
Definitely, I think the education piece is a huge part in different languages. I really think it's a massive part, and I think when I look at just in the community work that I do, you have people who want, like, for example, I've got a number of events lined up over the next couple of months that I'm doing, and like, people want to get involved, and they're like, but I can't, I'm struggling with this because of this and this, and I'm like, well, if this was okay, maybe they could be more come out, but because there's certain situations, it's usually to do with obviously their well-being, they're not able to come out and stuff like that. But it's creating that, I guess, that security for them to be able to learn and do that.
I think one of the things we shouldn't do is throw out the baby with the bathwater. And we shouldn't overlook the legacy media that we have. So our radio, our newspapers, our magazine, those kind of things are still really important for engaging with people. For sure. But they're also a great way of, kind of inspiring people to want to learn more. I always think, somebody asked me the other day, they said, I think it might have been in one of our conversations, where they said, what's it like, should we give up on people? And it's like, well, to the extent that if you talk to some people or a group of people and you find out a lot about them, and then you come back 10 years later and they haven't changed and they haven't learnt anything and they haven't grown and they haven't developed, I think, that's a real shame. And we become a society that seems to say, no, I don't need to learn about anything. But the world always changes around us, and we do. We hold on to our values of inclusiveness and respect and those kind of things. But what we need to do is, and sometimes it's about saying slow down. It's about saying to people, well, you don't need a smartphone, but we'll show you how to use it, but just one step at a time. And a lot of the time, because it's our social media, the marketing power is so powerful that it wants to hurry you along, the novelty, the next new thing.
It's the next shiny syndrome, isn't it?
And you spend a fortune, and people make policy decisions, and they install systems on the basis that they got overexcited, when sometimes it's about, no, let's slow this down.
Let's put the gas down a bit.
Take it one step at a time. Let's figure out what we're doing with this first, and then we'll grow things and change things. So for me, that kind of digital literacy things is about, just take your time with stuff. You will pick it up, but you also need to be around people who are also learning about similar things. Yeah. And you need to be able to pick up information from people who do radio programs and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that having the platforms of local community radio, and I think I didn't realise how much the voice carries. Even though I do radio, I didn't realise. It's only when I spoken to people over shows that I've done over the last year or so, I went and listened to that, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, how was it for you? Well,
we all connect with stories.
This is
we
it.
all connect with people's stories. Just tell those stories. And the voice is the great way of doing that. So I listen to podcasts all the time.
I mean, I love podcasts as well. Yeah.
I walked up here and I was listening to a couple of podcasts, and it's like, I find it really relaxing. It's a great thing to do. And
if you're not somebody who can't pick a book up every day, like I like to mix it between a book and a podcast, but I think podcasts are amazing. There's just so much knowledge and such a wealth of knowledge there, and it's at your fingertips. It's just made so simple. And I think those are the times when, like, even 10 years ago, podcasts were not huge, and now anyone and everyone can set up a podcast, which is awesome because it's about their voice and what they want to bring to the table, so to speak.
And just tune into everybody's story.
Yeah,
that's the main message.
Yeah, I think it's really it's amazing. And I think, just to summarize, so we've talked about kind of digital literacy. We've talked about why it's important to have infrastructure and features of a smart city in a place like Leicester. We've talked about the forgotten generation. We've spoken about health and well-being and the impact on what is currently happening in our system right now, and certain comparisons to other countries as well. So how, being literate with digital literacy, how does this affect the long term, I guess the bigger picture, so things like our community as a city of Leicester, in terms of things like policy change and when we need to bring in change in terms of what is beneficial for our community? Like, what's the importance of it?
Well, I think that the importance is to bring as many people into that conversation as possible, because I don't know the answer. Yeah. And I don't know which way it'll be going. And if I could predict that, I'd be very rich. And, I wouldn't be sitting here in a pair of trainers. I'd be having a chauffeur sitting outside in a Bentley. But it's, but in all seriousness, bringing people into the conversation is the answer, because people are, as much as they might frustrate us, people are smart. And we work it out when we talk with each other. Yeah. And we'll come up with the answers. And
I think what I can say is to, my listeners and anyone who listens back is like, get involved in the conversation, be part of, as I said earlier, be a change maker within your community. And just because it's maybe the same people whose voices are being heard, or those people being called to things, or to part of a forum, or whatever you want to call it, or a consortium, is find people that can hear your voice, and that it does matter. I think, if anything, in terms of researching this about smart cities and what's happening in Leicester, I think it's really important to have voices of those voices who are not heard, and those voices who maybe don't know the platform that they can come to. And especially if English is not your first language, I would say I'm an advocate of that, is get involved, and if we know that a certain demographic or a certain thing is not being heard, then those that do know, we need to be bringing new people in, and people whose perspectives are heard, because it's so important. And we have to keep our community voices going, because it's about us. It's gone past that stage where we need to be spoken about, but it's not our words and it's not our story. The narrative is not ours. So
learn to speak your own story, otherwise other people speak it for you.
Absolutely, and 100%. So whether that's through the medium of radio, your own podcast, your own books, your own newsletter, empower yourself, your own community, and make it in your own language. Like, we're starting to see things now, but I think there's still a way to go. But I think if you're in the know and you're in radio, you're in media, you're in some kind of journalism, empower other people to and teach them the tools of the trade. Run free workshops. These are just from my own experiences. Find a place, there's funding available, know where to go to, who to contact, and ask the questions, because it's the not asking the questions is where we close off anything else. And being apathetic, don't be apathetic, because it's game over then. Do you know what I mean? And I think as a community, we have a lot that we can offer. And there's amazing, great things happen, but let's hear the voices that we're not always hearing. I think that's really, really important. So then that brings me on to next, before we close off, Rob, so in this process of you researching about what a smart city is and the importance and the features of it, and, it's obviously research purposes, what's next, I guess, for you? And in terms of, I guess, what would you like to see, in terms of, the whole thing coming together, if that's even a statement?
Yeah, I should just mention that we're working with De Montfort University and the Alan Turing Institute as well to do this, which I should have said at the beginning. But I think it's just, we're kind of experimenting with this.
Yeah.
And I think it's about, if we've got a few people who then go, this community report and things quite interesting, and there's lots we can talk about in the future over the coming years about the smart city, and somebody like yourself says, actually I can do a regular program on my radio station to do this. That's the starting point. I've got no big answers, but just those small steps I think is what we need to focus on. And a couple of people inspired to take up a pen, pick up a camera, pick up a microphone, to start to look at what people's experiences are, and creating a sense of trust that people can open up and share those experiences and make a contribution to the discussion. And in each small way, that pushes back against the misinformation, pushes back against the antagonism, pushes back against the lack of trust, and it brings us together. And that I suppose is my idealistic sense of what I'd like from this.
And I think, it's amazing, the work that obviously this whole project of DMU and Alan Turing Institute, and I think it is all about community voices, and I think people don't realise how important their voice is, and I'll go back to that. People don't realise how important their voice is, and I think something like this, anyone can be involved, and it's not just about, how great English you speak, but even if it is in your mother tongue, contact me, contact Rob, through all the social media channels, or even through the YouTube channel, which is streaming live. And if you want to be involved, if you've got questions you want to ask, and it's giving you inspiration, it's giving you a burst of something that you haven't thought of before, then please get in touch with us, because, if we can do, the whole point of having community radio and community platforms is so we are asking the questions, and we are growing as a community in the direction that we need to, which is hearing each other's voices and creating those platforms, so we are, culturally aware. Not only that, but we're able to be funded correctly, and people, are taken care of accordingly as well. And then that's the idealistic in me. But yeah, that's it in terms of that. So what's kind of next, I guess, for this, about community voices, and also in terms of the smart city of Leicester, where what's kind of next, I guess, Rob?
Well, we're going to be bringing a group of people together to have a conversation with the support of Carl at Solver Studio in a couple of weeks' time, and we're hoping to learn and capture some content where we can talk about what this means, and talk about it in the context of health and well-being, and dig a bit deeper into it with people's experience. Because
health and well-being is a huge part, especially I think we've seen that during COVID, but also now the kind of aftermath of what we're seeing. I think for me, in terms of the whole health and well-being side, I think it's so difficult to just get basic appointments, and I think that kind of worries me in terms of some of the things that I'm seeing within our community that are happening. So I think if you can be involved in the discussion in things of what you'd like to see in terms of your health and well-being, please get in touch. You know, and then let's continue the conversation, you know, after this show, and hopefully we can have other shows over the coming months in terms of how we can educate ourselves, and anyone else who wants to be involved, if you've got particular skill around AI or, as you said, IT skills and things, come together. Let's have some workshops, let's have some education pieces, and if we can do that around other languages, then that would be amazing. Like, I think
do a live Google Translate.
That would be like, honestly, I mean, there's other apps as well, but I think, you know, that would be a good starting point, you know. I think it'd be amazing. And I think if you'd like to get involved and you're not somebody who is IT literate or even has a smartphone and who's, you know, older, then, you know, like my dad's in his 70s, he wants a smartphone, but it's going to take time for me to train him on it, you know. But I think, you know, it's creating that space to be able to do that. And I think, going through the research and understanding that's been, you know, it's highlighted a lot of things.
We're learning.
Yeah, and we're learning. We're constantly learning. By all means, nobody's an expert. But if you are an expert in AI or IT, then please get in touch. But before we close off the show, Rob, any kind of closing comments, any parting words?
No, just if you want to find out more and find out more about the project, it's leicesterstories.uk for the website, and we post stuff on Twitter and Instagram, which is Lec Stories.
Yeah. And thank you very much. If you'd like to get in touch with anything else, contact us through Ramadan Radio. Also contact us through the YouTube channel. It will obviously go out as a podcast as well. So get in touch with us. I think that's it for me. And I'd like to say thank you very much. It's been a very wholesome conversation. I've learned a lot, certainly from you, Rob. And it's always eye-opening to see things from a different perspective, and I love that. It's very wholesome. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair. Next up is Rumi's Revival, which is with the Dar al-Qur'an Trust and with Sheikh Zakir and Brother Yahya. Please stay tuned, and they'll be on just after me, inshallah. Jazakallah.